multi-millionaire who used to tell you to buy a house, now he's telling people this.
What's up, you guys? It's Graham here, and I gotta say this. I know this is gonna be probably one of the most controversial things I've ever said on the channel, and maybe I'm completely incorrect, but please hear me out so I could at least get this off my chest.
Okay.
Based on the numbers, I no longer think that it makes any financial sense whatsoever for most people to buy a house. In fact, I think we've all been sold this lie that buying a house is one of the single best investments you'll ever make. Because sure, even though this did make a lot of sense for the last few decades, at today's prices, I think this belief is gonna mislead a lot of people. So before you click out thinking I've lost my mind, I'm going to break down the exact numbers behind my thoughts, show you every piece of data that I could find, and I'll show you by the end of the video why buying a house could be a huge mistake for a lot of you watching. And also big thank you to the Gemini credit card for sponsoring this video, but more on that later. Alright, so in terms of buying a house, I'll be the first to say it. Up until a few years ago, buying a home was the smart financial choice. Like, it's funny, since 2017, I was showing people exactly how...
This is what I was going to refer to, because for the longest I've been saying buying a house will no longer be smart. And back then I was just saying it's just not worth the hassle that you have to deal with when things go wrong. Not if, when.
To buy a house here in the channel. I'd break down exactly how to find a deal that gave you instant equity. I described exactly how to shop around your rate to save a ton of money. And in 2020, that evolved into me saying that you should refinance your mortgage if that's going to save you on your monthly payment. But around 2022, give or take, everything changed. All of a sudden, there was no housing inventory. Home builders got delayed because of the shutdown. There was a shortage of building materials. What they could get, like lumber, shot up in price. And as a result, when a home did come on the market, it was bid up to brand new record highs because mortgage rates were at 2.75%. Like, think of it this way. When you buy a home for $100,000 at a 5% mortgage rate with 20% down, your monthly payment's going to come in at $430 a month. But you know what else is $430 a month? A $130,000 home with a 2.75% interest rate, essentially suggesting that people are able to spend 30% more for the exact same home overnight because their monthly payment wouldn't be changing whatsoever. And this, of course, leads to the first problem. Eventually, those mortgage rates are going to have to go back up, like we've already started to see. Right now, we have a housing market with the highest mortgage rates since the mid-2000s. We have some of the lowest inventory ever on record because existing homeowners know that if they were to sell and buy an identical house down the street, their monthly payment would more than double. And this is only sustainable for so long until A, mortgages return back below 4%, or B, housing prices decline. Which happens first? Now, in terms of declining home values, yes, it is true that year over year, home prices have actually increased by 0.3%. So if you bought a $400,000 home, today it's worth $401,000, and you've made money, right? Wrong. Like, here's what most people do. They look at their home price on Zillow, they see it trending upwards, and their first thought is, oh wow, great, it's worth $15,000 more than what I paid. This is incredible. But what they fail to consider is the amount of property tax, mortgage interest, insurance, repairs, maintenance, and opportunity cost of their down payment.
The hidden cost. The opportunity cost for me is the biggest one because you don't know what is around the corner. In fact, for this video, please, I want to hear your thoughts. What do you think? Because this is a big topic that everyone's always, you know, either left or right about. Let me know your comments in the comment section down below. While you're there, please smash the like button for YouTube algorithm.
That $15,000 of profit. And once you calculate the entire picture, you'll see a completely different situation emerge. Like, let's just take the example of a median priced home of $410,000. In this case, with 20% down at a 6.2% mortgage rate, you're spending $19,500 in mortgage interest, $4,100 in property tax, $2,000 in insurance, $4,000 in maintenance and repairs, and tying up $100,000 that otherwise could have invested elsewhere at a 4.2% return. This means when you add everything up, you're spending almost $32,000 out of pocket that you're never going to see again to own a home that went up in value $1,200 over the last year. Now sure, I know some people are going to counter this by saying, but Graham, you have to live somewhere, and at least with owning a house, it's yours, and you're not paying money to a landlord.
For rent.
This I 100% agree with. But what I find surprising is that today, across all 50 states, it's reported that buying a house is 50% more expensive than renting. And when you break down that monthly payment, you begin to see just how big of a difference it really is. The same applies even if you own your home outright. A 0.3% return seems positive until you consider that inflation is 2.7%, meaning your real rate of return actually declined in terms of purchasing power by 2.4%. Look, I know I've made these cringy titles in the past because that's what people click on, but for anyone who's actually watched the content of those videos to the end, this is something I've been saying for years. The Calculated Risk blog pointed out that we could be following a very similar trajectory to real estate prices in the 1970s. During that time, home prices continued going higher in terms of a dollar amount, but real returns when accounting for inflation fell by 11% over 3 years, meaning home prices went up, but the net value declined. So why are rents all of a sudden so much cheaper than buying? Well, the truth is it's a bit of a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, home prices are still high because of a shortage of inventory. There's still strong buyer demand for homes that are listed, and mortgage rates are still high compared to where they were a few years ago. While on the other hand, rents have become artificially cheap because homeowners don't want to give up their record low interest rate, so they're able to rent out their home instead at a price that no one else would be able to compete with because they have such a wide margin of profit. Like, here's another example. Imagine somebody buys a $500,000 house. At today's prices, that would cost them $3,000 a month with 20% down. So they'd need to rent for at least $3,000 in rent just to break even. Compare that to their neighbor next door who bought an identical home 4 years ago for $400,000 and locked in a 3% mortgage. Their payment is just $1,765 a month. So they could easily rent their house for $2,000 to make a profit. Well, today's buyer needs to rent at $3,000 just to avoid.
How on earth can you look at these two diagrams and say, okay, well, this still makes sense, I still want to, without realizing it's a whole business? They want you in. They want people on the front end to see, okay, well, these properties always go up. You always make money. And then you have people who actually run numbers. They're like, I mean, what is the problem with renting? Oh, I don't want to waste money because... Do you not think like that when you go into a restaurant? Do you not think you're paying off the guy's mortgage or the people who own the building? Do you not think that you're paying off the mortgage? Do you not think that that price, the amount of the food that you're paying for, is also factoring in the cost for the mortgage, you know, the employees, what they make, and all of that into that one price? You see what I mean? So it's...
Avoid losing money. And that is where a lot of the data comes in. Nationally, the chart says that rents are up 3.5% to 4% from a year ago. So this seems like a clear case that buying is still better. Except when you realize that new tenants who switched housing are actually seeing an 8.8% decrease in their rent once they move. Or in other words, existing rents are increasing because tenants are often locked into below market rates, where landlords are trying to raise the rent in line with expenses, but new tenants serve as the barometer for where the market is headed. On top of that, we also have the issue of home affordability. And here's where I put on my tinfoil hat, because this is where things get crazy. Although before we go into that, I just want to say that one of the most frustrating mistakes I see people make is not paying attention to the value of their everyday spending. Like, think about it. Housing is already expensive. Buying is almost impossible for a lot of people.
This sounds like an ad.
Meanwhile, every dollar you're forced to spend is either sitting there doing nothing. All right, now in terms of housing affordability, like I said, this is the part that gets crazy. In 2000, the median home price is around $120,000, which was roughly 1.7 times household income. But by 2024, the median single-family home was $412,000, equating to almost 5 times the median income. This is why, for the first time ever in history, home buyers over the age of 70 now outnumber those under the age of 35. And this might be by design. Take college as an example. In the 1980s, the Department of Education was created, and this streamlined the government's role in allowing students to borrow money that was backed by the United States. In theory, it was a good concept. Give people the financial means to go to college, back those loans by the federal government, and the more educated our society becomes, the better we do as a country. Except there was an unintended consequence. The more they subsidized student loans, the more college tuition increased, and therefore the more they subsidized student loans even more, which resulted in even higher tuitions. And now we're stuck with $1.8 trillion worth of student loan debt. On top of that, average earnings of college graduates never actually increased enough to keep up with the rising tuitions. Even from K through 12, those funds are not used for students or teachers, but rather spent on administrative staff. Essentially, the more the government subsidizes education, the more that schools charge. Who would have thought? It's kind of like saying, hey, how much do you need? And then schools say, how much do you got? Now, why do I say all of this? Well, the reason is because the government does the exact same thing with housing. Anytime you go and get a conforming mortgage, which is basically most mortgages out there, they're bundled together and backed by the federal government, who basically goes and says, if you can't find a buyer on the secondary market for these loans, we'll go ahead and pick up the tab. This ensures that there's always money out there to get a mortgage and buy a house, as long as you meet the minimum requirements for a credit score, down payment, and income, regardless of whether or not there's an investor on the other side to buy those loans. So is this another situation where the government guarantees larger loans, pressuring higher home prices, resulting in larger loans that pressure higher home prices? Well, in the UK, it was found that a Help to Buy program did nothing to fuel more construction, but it did result in rising prices exceeding the subsidy amount. Another paper in the United States found that homes that qualify for government financing see a price increase of $1.17 per square foot compared to homes that don't, all things being equal, suggesting that there is some measurable impact on the market. Or take a look at California. They gave out $300 million in down payment assistance, and it was completely gone in 11 days. Now, on the flip side, I get it. Homeownership promotes stability. Most people's only means of saving is by paying down a mortgage, and after 30 years, they hopefully own it outright. That's why it makes sense for the government to want to assist people in buying a house. But it also serves as an artificial backstop to preserve existing equity, for better or worse. Although before we talk about when it's a good idea to buy a house, I want to share a quick message from the US government. Have you or anyone you know been diagnosed with housing unaffordability? Are you sick and tired of starter homes selling more than you could afford on a salary that hasn't increased in more than 5 decades? Well, thankfully, it's not your fault, and we're here to help. Instead of solving the root cause of the issue, including but not limited to zoning restrictions, constrained supply, asset inflation, excess capital, labor shortage, and low interest rates, it's easier to ignore everything and just give you a larger loan instead. How about this $3 million 2-bedroom home in Venice Beach that sold for $700,000 a year ago? Call us. We'll give you a $2.9 million loan, no questions asked. Or what about this overpriced $1.5 million townhome in San Bernardino that's not worth the seller's asking price? Well, that's not your problem, as long as you promise to make the payments. We'll give you whatever you need, backed by the faith and service of the US taxpayer. And best of all, if the payments are too high to afford on a stagnant wage, we'll give you a 40-year loan instead. That way your children can deal with it. Call toll-free 1-800-SUBSCRIBE and we'll send you a completely free, no-obligation DVD on how we plan to tax the people who make slightly more than you do. Because we live by the motto that if we don't know what we're doing, the best solution is to raise taxes. Finally, before I talk about the situations where buying a house actually does make sense, because I've not completely lost my mind, I want to address this comment. But Graham, what about all the hedge funds and corporations that are buying up all the housing? Okay, here's the truth. This Wall Street buying homes narrative really seems to have started with this Twitter thread, which made the claim that BlackRock is buying every single family house they could find, paying 20 to 50% above asking price and outbidding normal home buyers. However, when you actually go and investigate these unsourced claims, as it turns out, the neighborhood in question was a purpose-built rental community built by D.R. Horton, and their business was intended to be a fully occupied rental community flip. That is how they created a 50% profit margin. Separate from that, though, we also have plenty of other stories like this. A fifth of California homes are investor-owned. By the sound of it, this is an absurd number that's surely to blame for high housing prices, right? Well, not so quite, especially when you realize that those numbers were significantly higher than they were back in 2004, 2005, and 2011, when investors purchased nearly 1 in 3 homes for sale. Second, the term investor is also extremely broad and very misunderstood. Like, a person buying their first rental property or inheriting a house from their parents and renting it out is treated the exact same way as a billion-dollar conglomerate buying 1,000 single-family homes and renting them all out. So let's break down this term a little bit further. Of the 26% of homes that are currently sold to investors, half are mom-and-pop landlords who own less than 9 properties, and only 11% of that half are mega corporations. This means when you go and buy a property, 75% of the people that you compete with are other owner users, 12% are mom-and-pop landlords, and just 2.8% are corporations who own more than 1,000 units, who chances are not competing with you to buy that single-family home.
You're a small fish.
they're not going to make any money from that deal. The thing is that a lot of people don't think about is that an investor has to make a profit, and that usually requires them to buy a property that needs a substantial amount of work to rehabilitate, or at a price that's well below market value, which is usually not at the expense of negotiating or competing with other owner users. Investors are usually buying the properties that require large, substantial renovations, floor plan adjustments, ripping out kitchens and bathrooms, and spending 4 to 8 months just to make it livable. It makes no sense for an investor to ever compete on a turnkey property with an owner user, because even if they did get it, they would end up losing a lot of money. There's no upside. In fact,
now we're about to get into when should you actually buy a house. But despite that, so far from everything that you've seen Graham mention, let me know in the comment section down below, what do you think? Has your opinion changed? Do you plan on doing anything different? But yeah, let's carry on anyways.
Being at the whims of a landlord who gives you 60 days notice to leave because they want to move back in. You could remodel it however you like. Once it's paid off, you own it outright, and you could eventually pass it on to your kids. But at today's prices, you are paying a premium for the privilege of being able to call it yours. But second though, in terms of buying a house, we also have the finances where it does make sense. The reality is, the longer you plan to stay in your home for, the more it makes sense to buy instead of rent. Like in the past, I usually found the break-even point to be about 3 to 5 years, meaning if you plan to live in this house longer than that, it made more sense to buy it than rent it. But at today's levels, it might take you 15 to 20 years or more to break even between the cost of buying and renting, once you factor in closing costs and all the overhead expenses associated with today's prices. In fact,
once you factor in if you're still going to be alive as well, and that money could have actually helped you, I don't know, God forbid, but maybe with medical bills or just your living experience. You know, nobody likes living paycheck to paycheck or struggling for money, or having a huge amount of money that just comes off every single month simply because you wanted to just say, oh, this is my house, I own this, when you technically don't. It's still the banks until you pay everything off.
Closing costs and all the overhead expenses associated with today's prices. In fact, what I found funny is that I plugged in the real numbers for a home that's right down the street from me in Las Vegas. And this calculator says that buying only becomes cheaper after 28 years.
Come on,
basically,
man.
when I've just paid off the house in full. And that's even accounting for 3% inflation and 3% rent increases. Now, inevitably at this point, people will say, yeah, but mortgages will eventually come back down when the Federal Reserve lowers interest rates, and then you could refinance to save all the money. Sure, this could certainly happen, but it could also take a lot longer than you expect, and relying on a refinance to save the day and justify a home purchase is incredibly risky. Or what do I know? Maybe mortgages go back down to 2%, home buying demand surges, and prices skyrocket again even higher than they are today. Or baby boomers exit their homes, helping supply much-needed inventory back onto the market by 2035. The reality is, home prices move very, very, very slowly. It's a lot like turning around a large tanker ship, where you make a 1-degree correction, and over time you eventually see it turning. That's why if you are in the market to buy a home, do so very cautiously and intentionally, with the full understanding that your monthly payment's going to be a lot more than just your mortgage. If you plan to stay there, hunker down, raise a family, and keep it long enough for it to make sense, go ahead, buy a house.
Let's see what the comment section says, okay? Because I'm very curious. All the YouTube real estate gurus that are telling you that renting is better than owning, come on, man, are the ones who own rental properties. I would argue people who own rental properties are in a better situation or better position to tell you what's good and what's not, because they've actually been on the other end, they've experienced. Someone who's rich, filthy rich, and they're telling you money's not everything, I would argue they're more skilled. They have credibility. You might not like it because, well, it's easy for you to say because you've got money. Yes, you're right. But since I've got money, I can tell you what it actually feels like on the other end by telling you, hey, you might want to watch out because not everything. More money, more problem, X, Y, and Z, and all of this. So I don't see what's the point or the reason as to why to lie, especially Graham, someone who takes his credibility serious. But yeah, that's just the response or the rebuttal for that comment anyways. When everyone's a renter, it's a good business being an owner. Yeah, I hear it, okay? LOL, of course this comes out when I'm in the process of closing. On my first house. That is funny. Goodness me, man. You're good as long as you can afford it. Plan to stay there long enough to break even between the cost. Yeah, plan to stay there for 28 years, he mentioned, so you could break even. Meanwhile, whilst you could have invested that into Bitcoin, you could have invested that into Tesla, and you would have made a better return. Period. I'm not even going to compare it to anything else. Had you have invested in Tesla, which on this channel there are videos I had been saying, invest in Tesla, buy Tesla, buy Tesla. Some people even started calling me the Tesla prophet. You would have had a way better return compared to investing that into property. Anyways, man, Graham's video makes my day. Arms looking swole. Arms looking swole, bro. Keep it up, cause it's inspiration. Let's see what's. Thanks. So I can see Eva is Jack replying to these. Well, actually, no, Jack probably doesn't anymore. It might be Graham. I don't know, but yeah. Yeah, no, these a lot of these comments are genuine. So look, but all I'm interested in is your thoughts. What are you guys' thoughts? What is your thought in regards to this? Yes, no, I'll still rent. I'll buy a property. I want to hear from you anyways. Let me know in the comment section down below. Like the video. You already know what I think. I think it just doesn't make sense anymore. I've never thought really it made sense to begin with. I was always very, very cautious, but hey. God bless, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.